Welcome to These Aren't the Nerds You're Looking For, everybody. Lorenzo Fawn sitting here with
Kevin Horde. How you doing, buddy?
Good, my man. Yes, we are moving right along here through, what are we calling? What is this arc called? What are we calling this?
The Slave Arc.
Slave Arc, indeed. So we are going to be talking about Season 4, Episode 12 of The Clone Wars, titled Slaves of the Republic. This is an episode that aired December 2nd, 2011, directed by Brian Kalin O'Connell, written by Henry Gilroy and Stephen Melching. Production 4.04. Yeah. So we're following the episode Kidnapped.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I feel weird calling this the Slave Arc. Maybe the Zygerrian Arc might be better.
Yeah. Yeah. Dealing with a bunch of Zygerrians, even though we don't always stay there, right?
And or know
we don't even start
what
there,
their names
honestly.
are.
Right.
Half the time.
Yeah. So, the fortune cookie for this episode is those who enslave others inevitably become slave themselves.
Who you got?
Because
I got nobody.
You got nobody?
I got nobody, man.
All I can see is like in some other like quiet little moment. This is something Qui-Gon might say to Watto or something, only because that's like the main time other than Clone Wars we deal with slavery head on, right?
Yep.
I don't see Padme saying this to anybody, especially at that point in the story. I don't see even Obi-Wan saying that to anybody. Like, Qui-Gon's the only one, like, brazen enough to
call somebody
really
out like that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah. So that's what I got.
Well thought out, man. I had, like I said, I had nothing. I got nobody.
Yeah.
I was like, what the fuck is this?
It's a good fortune cookie, and it is very on the nose with this arc, for sure, but it is just sort of a weird sideways thing that happens. The only other person that I could see saying this after the fact is the Queen from this episode,
right?
Or Anakin to the Queen. That's the only other thing. But beyond that, even in those cases, it's a little too brazen, even for Anakin to some degree.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you that after having seen this episode, this is something that the Queen would say. Maybe not in these exact words, but she does have some dialogue that is somewhat similar to this statement. But I like where you were going with Qui-Gon, and that totally makes sense. This is like something that Qui-Gon said to Watto off screen after Watto is completely left broken, and
right.
Qui-Gon's just rubbing his fucking nose in it.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool.
That's exactly how I saw it. So, moving right along to the newsreel. This is a super, super short newsreel. It is basically 2 sentences. 3, sort of. But really, 1 super short sentence. Again, we start with like a single word sentence. Kidnapped, which was the episode previously, which I found funny. I wouldn't even call this a recap of the last episode. It's literally just like a quick setup for this episode.
Yeah.
Right? Like, all we know is that a bunch of people have been kidnapped, and a bunch of colonists, and they've been kidnapped by Zygerrian slavers. And the Jedi are moving over to Zygerria to try and find where these 50,000 colonists have gone.
Yep.
That's it. Like, we explain nothing of the previous episode beyond that.
Yep. I mean, it gets the gist of it twice.
It's all we need for this episode, honestly. Like, we need no other context for this episode, and I'm kind of down for that.
Yeah, I thought it was fine.
Yeah. So basically, we have Anakin, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, Rex, all aboard a ship heading to Zygerria. Zygerria?
I think they say it both ways.
No,
I think I think the newsreel narrator says Zygerria, and then I think that Anakin immediately says Zygerrians.
Mm-hmm.
So,
of course they did.
Yeah,
So, yeah. So they head to Zygerria, and they have a plan where they're all disguised. Obi-Wan, Rex, Anakin are disguised in like Zygerrian outfits, even though they aren't Zygerrian themselves. This part confused me a little bit because no Zygerrians really stopped them, because it's even with the clothing and the helmets they wear, like
they still don't look like cat people.
Yeah, they're different species, so it's like they stand out. So
Right.
I'm not sure exactly why that was necessary, other than the fact that they were trying to hide that they were Jedi, maybe. But
yeah,
even then, it's still weird.
Well, like
the plan
later we kind of get into like Anakin's cover story.
Yeah.
Which we'll delve into a little bit later, but I think that the idea is that like they were working with Zygerrians, and that's why they're dressed in the traditional Zygerrian headgear.
Right. So it's just culturally appropriating an entire planet, but sure.
Well, maybe culturally incognitoizing.
Yeah. But the overarching plan is for Ahsoka to be disguised as a slave, and Anakin is her master, and they, as a pair, are going to go meet the Queen. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan and Rex will try and find out where the rest of the Togrutan colonists are. All 50,000 of them, supposedly. That's the number that keeps getting thrown around. So
yeah,
50,000 missing people.
So is this a good plan?
I don't think it's the worst plan. We're going to have more discussions about this as the plan carries on.
Okay.
I think the start of a plan, this is a good idea. Other than, again, the question of what the disguises help them out with,
Okay.
I think the idea of going straight to the Queen or somebody of authority and trying to get that information from them, that is a sound plan. Again, as the plan progresses, I don't know if the way they get to that is ideal.
Yeah, it seems pretty simplistic. It's like you go find the slaves, and I'm just gonna go talk to the Queen, because that's what normal people do. Is they just go somewhere and immediately are, take me to your leader. And
the highest authority, of course, too. Yeah,
I would imagine if somebody came to the United States and they were looking for a friend of theirs, they would be like, "Take me to the president."
Yep.
And
like,
that
this guy's missing.
totally
this
be
guy's
allowed.
in Missouri.
Like, hey,
we're gonna go straight to the president.
Right. I got my blue suit, my white shirt, and my red tie. Take me to the president.
Yeah, it's a broad plan. That's for sure. It's a broad plan.
I did like the little exchange that Ahsoka and Anakin had, where Ahsoka's like, "Why do I have to be dressed up as a slave?" And Anakin's like, "Yeah, I tried it once. I'm not very good at it."
I do like the callbacks to Anakin's past regarding his slave start.
Mm-hmm.
I think they made appropriate callbacks without it. I don't know. It doesn't overtake the story. The story doesn't become about like his PTSD of being a former slave or his trauma of being a former slave. It's there. It's definitely there, but it doesn't take over the whole story. I'm not saying that I would have minded if it did.
Mm-hmm.
But for the story that they present, I don't think that's a necessary like characteristic that we need played with here.
Right. The info that comes out is more world building and not plot based.
Yeah.
Like the plot doesn't build upon his previous experience. Mm-hmm. Like the plan and things are outside of that, but
Right.
it does. It builds out the world for Ahsoka. She's able to kind of get some more information out of Anakin, because we were discussing last week how Anakin doesn't talk about his past, and that somehow she didn't even know that he was a slave. Like, she got that info from Obi-Wan. And so he's a little more open about it now. And I think it helps build their relationship a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
She does make a nice wisecrack back to him, because he's like, so you're going to be the slave and I'm going to be the master because I'm good at that. And she's like, yeah, why don't you try to make it convincing? Just like,
Yeah.
ribs him up real good.
Yep, there's some good banter for sure. But pretty quickly, we follow them into a marketplace. There is a fun little moment I would bring up where we see there are two animals that are fighting.
The Gwaki monkey lizards?
Yes, yeah.
That was
and they're
my
like
next note.
straight up knife fighting, which is fun. Like,
Yep.
it's the silliest visual, but I'm glad it exists.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who is benefiting from this, because it doesn't look like anybody's placing bets or anything. It's just happening.
Yeah, it's
just
not
happening.
like a cockfight. It's just...
Not at all.
Um,
Like, we're going full Michael Jackson's Beat It music video, right? Like, there's not going to be any winners in this scenario.
nope.
But it's just there. Like, we don't really quite see the conclusion of this, but it exists. And again, I'm just happy this imagery exists. But from there, our crew split up. Anakin and Ahsoka head to the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
Ahsoka immediately forgets exactly what she's doing, which did bother me.
I
Where,
don't know if I'd say she forgets. I think it's just inexperience, right? Because she's trying, she's a just person. And
right.
we see the slave getting beat down, and
Yes.
she grabs the wrist of the person sending the attacking blow.
The slaver, yeah.
The slaver, right? And he's
Yeah.
like, you filthy slave, how dare you touch me? And Anakin's got to step in, and that puts his plan into motion.
Yeah. And it is kind of by luck that they are able to have the discussion that they have. So from there, there's like a whole thing where the slaver is threatening Anakin, but then Anakin throws out a name that we have never heard before, and Anakin is like, well, like, you don't, like, I need to see the queen. And the guy is like, what do you mean? Like, you can't just see the queen. That's not how any of this works.
Right, I suppose
Some
you have
red-
an invitation.
Right. This red camera shows up because I guess we live in a Big Brother state on Zygerria.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's
And-
kind of like a Voldemort name thing. Like, maybe they're just these little droids are not even for security, but just for, like you said, like Big Brother watching. And I think the name Bruno Zenturi got flagged, and the Queen probably got a notification on her Apple Watch or whatever, so she was able to see the feed of what was going on, and she's like, hey, bring that guy to me.
But it's just weird because these cameras show up before he even begins to hint that he has, like, other information.
Well, there's a little ruckus with Ahsoka,
Yeah, there's a tussle, I guess. But yeah, it's just weird that Anakin's like, well, you don't want the Queen to not get news regarding Bruno Dentori. And the guy somehow knows, too. And the guy's like, wait, what? Bruno Dentori. And then some other dudes show up, and they're like, oh, by the way, the Queen wants to see you now.
And this is what I was alluding to at the beginning of this episode, where all of these people are nameless.
Yes.
It's...
Including the Queen.
Including the Queen for, like, the
Queen
entirety of this episode.
I don't think she gets named at all, does she? Not in this episode.
Not that I remember.
Yeah,
I have her name written down, but it's not from viewing the episode.
No, she just definitely gets regarded as the Queen. Anakin shows up, just calls her, like, Your Highness or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then so basically, Anakin gets pulled into the palace with Ahsoka, they meet the queen. Anakin gives himself a fake name of Lars Quell and basically flatters the queen endlessly, and then she's like all for it.
Well, I mean,
Anakin,
he tries to at first and then fails because he's like, oh, I thought you would want to talk to me since Denturi sent me. And she was like, oh, yeah? Did he tell you that we hate each other and that's not going to help you out in this situation? And then he like tries to flatter her and tell her how beautiful she is and that he'll never speak her name again because he killed him.
Right.
Do you think this actually happened? Like, I don't even understand how Anakin knows who this guy is.
Exactly.
That's think that
my issue with this. Yeah, this is my issue with this moment too. We have never heard the name Bruno Dentori. It could have this character's name could have literally just been called Bruno MacGuffin, and that would have been fine.
It should have been Dratz Dinar, the guy from the last episode.
Right.
They have his ship. They have his fucking clothes.
Right.
Like, that's all that they needed.
Right. Just go with that and be like, oh, by the way, like, Darts is dead. So, like, by the way, like, we killed Darts. So, what you want,
Right. Dinar sent us, but unfortunately he died before he could make it back here.
Right. So, it's a weird, like, extra tidbit of information, and if you look up Bruno Denturi on Wikipedia, it literally just is like, hey, it's the name that Anakin used to convince a queen to win favor. Like, that's all it says. We know nothing else about this person. Is never brought up again. We never see them. We never have an episode preceding this, obviously, because we're doing this in chronological order. Like, there is no Bruno Denturi that we actually care about.
His appearances are also only listed as this episode, so it's not like he was in a comic or something else, or mentioned in a novelization or on Galaxy's Edge or anything. Like, this is it. His name pops up as the cover story for Anakin, which kind of falters in the beginning. Then Anakin like turns, tweaks it a little bit, and he's like, oh yeah, I killed that guy, fuck that guy, you're pretty, that guy.
Yeah, you're a really pretty queen. So they become buddies after all of that, and the queen is taken by also Ahsoka as a slave. There's like an unveiling of Ahsoka. She's got like a different dress on underneath the slave robes she was wearing. Ahsoka, of course, tries to play the part, and there's a moment where she is just clearly bad at acting, which I thought was a fun little moment.
It was.
And everybody else is like into it though. Everybody is like, oh yes, like that slave has a mouth on her, watch out.
Anakin has to apologize for her several times, which is completely not what a slave master does.
Not at all. No. Never. Yeah, like every other slave master we see has like a full whip situation, like an electro whip.
Mm-hmm.
And the most we get from Anakin is like, sorry about my slave. Stop it, slave.
She's not good at being a slave because she just started being a slave.
She's a new slave, so she hasn't gone through her. Yeah, like her 90-day evaluation is coming up very soon. Don't worry. Like, we'll have a big chat about this. So the queen and Anakin get to know each other, and they're having a conversation, and there's this other moment where one of the queen's actual slaves tries to stab her. She's like holding a knife under like a platter of drinks, right? And then tries to go for the stab. I think she means to try to stab the queen, but she's kind of like Anakin is already between this slave and the queen, so her timing is just really piss poor, honestly.
I think the camera angle shows that he's in between them, but she comes from the side.
Yeah,
because
like
when
there's just like a little distance, there's a bit of distance. Anakin's just slightly off to the side, and then we get like a camera angle change where like the knife looks like it's kind of trying to make its way past Anakin's shoulder towards the queen. But then Anakin, of course, just like immediately is like, oh, by the way, and then just like bats the knife out of her hand. And everybody's like, oh no, the slave tried to kill the queen. And the slave is like backing up towards a ledge, and it was like, you'll never take me alive. And she jumps off the ledge.
Yeah, because the queen threatens to send her back to
reprocessing, right?
Yeah.
She will be reprocessed. We don't hear where. We just know that there is some sort of facility
for re-education, essentially.
Yeah, like to break the will of these slaves so that they will just do slave things, I guess.
And so this slave decides to commit suicide instead of going through that process again. So I did look into this slave a little bit, and unnamed, just known as unidentified slave girl. Now, the curious thing is that there is a difference between her canon and her legends. And
interesting.
From what I understand is the legends comes from comics. The canon comes from this episode. And the legends is like the same backstory, the same thing happened. She tries to kill the queen. She commits suicide instead. But in the comics, it was a human slave girl. And then for this episode, they changed her to a Twi'lek slave girl. And then the timeline doesn't line up, where this story takes place in 20 BBY and the comic took place in 21 BBY.
Yeah, I don't like any of that. I'm not gonna lie. This we've had this discussion before, but by George, am I glad they got rid of some of those legends things.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah, like I get it. There are good things, but there are things like this that are so blatant, where it's like, oh, she had a human slave, and now the slave's a Twi'lek. And for a universe that was like so good about trying to create like consistent backstories for things, it's just weird. It's like it could have just been a different slave, and that would have been fine. But no, we're gonna call this the same slave.
Well, it's the same story in the comics. Like,
right. Well,
the comic depicts this story, and I guess it came out before this episode.
Yeah, none of that makes any sense. So, just me that just said that. Just glad that certain things were just swept away. That's fine. After this unnamed slave girl dies, actually before she throws herself, I just do want to mention Anakin does have a moment where he tries to save her the best he can while still keeping his cover.
Right, because he can't just Jedi Force power save her.
Yeah, so unfortunately she has to die. But because of that, there's an opening for the role of slave to the queen, and the queen looks to Ahsoka and I was like, well, you have a very pretty slave. I like her. Can I take this slave? And Anakin's like, yes, she's my gift to you.
Okay. That is totally what happens, but also twice before this, because we do kind of cut back and forth to like some B-roll essentially or something, right? Excuse me. We see a hut at one point in time, and I was like, oh, sweet. We have like a hut lord here that's going to play some role. But really it was just like this hut's here, that's it. So twice before this, like when Anakin first gets to the palace, he's like, I have a gift for you. This slave is my gift to you. Yeah. And then later she's like, oh, well, we'll discuss payment. And then later Anakin's like, the slave I brought as a gift. And then the queen's like, so we've agreed upon a price. And then Anakin's like, I'm giving her to you.
Yes. And it's this slave here.
Right. Like, we're not... You guys aren't connecting in this conversation on some level because Anakin's trying to give her away 3 times. And the Queen's like, well, how much do you want? And he's like, it's a gift. And then I guess they talked, and she's like, we agreed upon a price. And he's like, no, she's a gift.
No. Yeah.
Just giving her to you.
There is a few moments, too, where, like, Anakin whispers into the Queen's ear, and then the Queen,
it's so bad, though.
It's super weird. So, like... And we never exactly ever understand what is meant to be even said there. It's kind of pointless, honestly, other than this like weird relationship building moment between the Queen and Anakin.
It might as well be quote unquote dialogue out of like early Lego games, like Lego Indiana Jones or whatever, because like when the characters in those games would talk to each other, it's like like mumbly, and then the Queen's just like giggling like, oh, you're such a rake, oh my gosh. But it happens twice in this episode, like the whisper mumbling, and it's just bad. I don't like it.
It's weird. And it doesn't really add that much. So there are other things they could have done, like written actual lines maybe. I don't know. But yes, I agree with you. It's weird that they keep talking about Ahsoka being a gift, and then at the end, finally, Anakin's like, oh, by the way, like, no, she's a gift. And the Queen is like, oh, you're too kind. You flatter me. You know.
Oh, your flatterous words.
Yeah. Oh, only a true friend of the Queen would just give away a wonderful slave like this. That's not exactly what the Queen sounds like. I don't know why that became my accent for the Queen.
They do have an interesting accent. Later, the Queen says the word Jedi, but she pronounces it with like the apostrophe IA or AI, like Jedi. I don't know. It's like an interesting way. Pronunciation of the word, right? And that took me back to like other old EU stuff, like of the old story of the Jedi, and I'm trying to think of what it was, where it was like the word itself was written differently, and it was like JD apostrophe either HI or IA, I don't remember which. And that's the way that I imagined that word being pronounced.
Right.
But
she's like got a holdover from whatever native tongue she's speaking that translated it slightly differently.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm down for that. That's a really cool point for sure, because I definitely noticed that in her accent, and it's fairly consistent across all the Zygerrians. Yeah. You know, but she's the one that's most prominent for sure, with this sort of, I don't know. It's a sort of sing-songy, dialect of basic for sure. But yeah, so at the end of all this, she gets a gift. It's right about here, right, that we finally jump back to Obi-Wan and Rex, correct?
So we have already seen a little bit of what they were going through when the hut shows up. He like bumps into a Zygerrian guard.
It's the hut with the monocle, right?
Yeah, it's the hut with the monocle.
Yeah. It's the hut with monocle. Yeah.
Yep. I don't remember what his name is.
It's a monocle and like an earpiece. He has like a headset, like a
TeamSpeak.
It's like a McDonald's like drive-through headset.
There you go.
And a monocle. And what's weird is the monocle is attached to the other side of the headset too. I don't know if you noticed that.
I did not.
So it's like monocle is on his right eye, and then it pops around, and it's attached to like where the head clip would end if it's just a one-sided deal, and then on the left side of his head there's like the big McDonald's drive-through contraption sort of thing. It's like a cross between that and like the headsets like the NFL coaches and like NASCAR coaches wear, right?
I never thought of NASCAR having coaches. That's interesting.
Or whatever they're called, like the pit bosses, or what are they called? I don't know. let's just stick with the NFL coaches.
Sure.
Sports things.
This is Gorja Desagilic Arpo. Arpo? I don't know.
Arpo? Like
AARRPO.
Arpo Marx?
Yeah, maybe.
But, yeah. It's like this weird little moment. Bumps into Obi-Wan and Rex. They are looking for where these 50,000 slaves could possibly be.
And
they are having trouble.
Yeah, it's this little interaction of this hut bumping into Obi-Wan that clues him into where the slaves are. Because, like, Gorja bumps into Obi-Wan, and then Obi-Wan kind of turns around so that the camera can see that it's him.
Yeah.
And then he looks in a hole. There's, like, these giant square holes in the floor.
Right.
Where they're, like looking to a lower level. And he's like, yo, Rex, check it out. There's a Togruta down there. Yep.
And then Obi-Wan jumps down.
But it seems like they've been there for a while. They're like posing as guards at the dock or something.
Yeah, I don't know what they've been doing this whole time, and I don't know how they got here or how they knew about this place. We just know they're here.
Yep.
And then Obi-Wan jumps down to this big slave pit thing and finds Rashti, the Togrutan governor that we were introduced to in the previous episode on Kyros.
Yep.
And he is looking worse for wear, that's for sure. He is just looking tired and weak, and his will to live is not high at this point.
Not high at all.
Obi-Wan still is not able to figure out where the other 49,999 Togrutans have gone.
Yep.
So Obi-Wan, basically because of that, he's like, well, we know they're not here. He just decides to try and break Rashti out. And, of course, alerts everybody in the process.
Yeah, he's not sneaky at all. He's like, I'll just take this helmet off because fuck that. And then he jumps down in, grabs him, jumps out, and everybody's like, hey, you can't just steal a slave. What are you doing? We just keep slaves in holes in the ground on the lower level.
I didn't understand this plan at all. Like, they were nice and stealthy for a hot second. So, like, I get wanting to save Rashti, but also, like, there are bigger stakes right now, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, unfortunately, it's like a trolley problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you save Rashti or do you save the rest of the 50,000 Togrutans, right? So, he chooses Rashti. They try to escape. They even hop on. What are those? I did not take down. There are a couple animals that were also guarding this palace.
Oh, I don't know, but they were cool.
Yeah, they're like lizards with wings that kind of fly around a bit.
Yeah, they're like gliding lizard frog things.
Yeah. So Rex grabs one. Obi-Wan has Rashti on his shoulders, hops up, jumps on the back of this thing with Rex, puts Rashti seated between Rex, who's up front, and Obi-Wan in the rear. They start riding away on this animal. One of the guards really quickly is like, yeah, you there, stops, shoots at the trio, hits Obi-Wan in the back. Obi-Wan flies off along with Rashti. The guards capture those two. Rex gets on out of there on the back of the animal.
Yeah, he's like, fuck that.
Right. Time
keep
for me
on
to
going.
fly.
I will say this.
Mm-hmm.
Obi-Wan must be tough. Because
Yeah,
in the
he gets
last
a
episode,
straight shot.
he just got his ass beat the whole time. Which was
Mm-hmm.
like yesterday in the timeline or whatever.
Yeah.
And then he just gets shot in the back. This single blaster bolt would have taken out like 2 or 3 stormtroopers.
Oh, absolutely.
And they have armor on.
Yep.
They don't just have like a leather tunic.
Yeah. So he gets a direct hit on his back, like right on one of his shoulder blades. Just simply falls off. So, the Zygerrians are torturing Obi-Wan, trying to figure out who he is. We got a slave driver, I guess, like whipping him on the back. Obi-Wan's up in chains. Atai Molech shows up and recognizes Obi-Wan from the telecall that we saw with Darth Dinar in the previous episode, where Obi-Wan entered and Dooku was like, "Hey, I want to introduce you to Obi-Wan Kenobi."
Okay, now it makes sense why Dooku's like, I need to introduce you to this guy so that you recognize him in next week's episode. Because I was thinking to myself, like, one, I figured that the big generals of this Clone Wars would kind of be recognizable, especially, you know, Obi-Wan, Anakin, Plo Koon, Yoda, Mace Windu, Ki-Adi-Mundi, like, all of these guys are probably have had their faces out there.
Right.
So when he was like, I recognize you from the Hollows, I thought he was talking about like Hollow News or something like that, right? Not
Right.
I totally didn't make the connection to
last week's episode already.
the Dooku introduction.
Yep.
And now it makes more sense why that was set up then for this moment now, because then I was also thinking like, well, if he recognizes Obi-Wan, why didn't he recognize Anakin?
Right.
But
I get it. It is a weird setup in the previous episode, but I do like the setup there and the payoff here. I think it would have been more weird to try and force a telecall somewhere in this episode for this moment.
Yeah, now that you explained it to me, it totally makes sense. Last week it seemed goofy, and this week it seemed goofy, but when you put them together, it makes sense.
It works, yeah. I think that's the best way to approach the fact that Molech needs to know who Obi-Wan is, because the reasoning is it then makes Obi-Wan a higher prize, I guess, to be put into slavery. And so then in the follow-up scene, we basically have like a big auction that's about to be put on place with the Queen in attendance as well.
Yeah, this is like a Roman style, almost Colosseum on a smaller scale with a stage in the middle, and they bring out slaves like one by one.
Yeah. Yeah.
I imagine that this is not only like a buying amphitheater, but it's also like an entertainment amphitheater.
Right.
Like, not everybody there is there to purchase. Some people are there to be entertained.
Yeah. The only weird thing to me is, like, I get perhaps that it's cultural, but it's weird that an auction of this sort, like, we don't really get a sense of who's there to buy.
Yeah, but you don't see anyone, you just hear people.
Yeah. Yeah, we barely see an audience, which is kind of funny, too. We just get certain shots of this auditorium. We get like one wide shot, I think, at most. But it's weird that the Queen is in attendance for basically what is a sale, right? Like, I don't know. It's not like Trump was in the room when Disney bought Fox, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, but Disney isn't the United States. Like, this Zygerrian slave auction is the Zygerrian slave auction. Like, that
it's
is
like it's their governmental
that is their deal
thing.
My thought is that this is the first slave auction in like 1,000 years. Because do you remember from last week's episode where it was like the Zygerrians hate the Jedi because the Jedi shut down the slave auction like 1,000 years ago? Now, all of the stuff in this episode leading up to this auction does not seem like that, because there's other slaves walking around and getting beat up, and like they have all the structure, and it seems like the slave trade has still continued, just not on the mass scale that it used to. But now we have a lot of 50,000 slaves, so I think that the Queen would be in attendance to reinstate this grand slaving process. And like, you know,
grand slave economy is being
right.
rebooted.
She could have really had like a speech like ready, like, you know, this is going to bring us back to our former power. Like, we don't have to just trudge through the streets, you know, like we're power to the Zygerians, and we're coming back, baby. You know, so I think that's why it's set up this way.
Okay.
And it gets interrupted by this guy, Molech, coming in and doing the warbly whisper in the queen's ear.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have an urgent message, warble, warble, warble. And then she kind of changes her tune of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then they bring out the second slave. The first slave that they brought out was the governor, right?
Yep.
The second slave that they bring out is Obi-Wan.
Mm-hmm.
And the governor wasn't even sold yet because he comes out and then this urgent message from Molech comes in and then she's like, all right, bring out the next slave. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I got like the best thing ever for us. Mm-hmm. Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, no longer a master, now to be enslaved, and gives this big speech about how the Jedi can be broken, and when they are broken, like, you know, the Zygerians will have the ultimate power of the universe, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then she takes one of these electro whips and gives it to Anakin and says, you know, prove your worth, prove your loyalty. If you're a slaver, go and whip this slave.
Right.
And Anakin gets like a weird smirk on his face.
It is weird. It's also like, I didn't understand this motivation either. Like, this far into the game, why does the queen need like explicit like proof that he's an actual slaver? Like, it's just weird because at this point he's already given her Ahsoka.
Yeah, but I would imagine that the warble whisper was like, hey, these guys aren't who they say they are. So she's trying to, she's doing the, you know, you got to prove it to me,
I guess. But also, like, it's a strange little moment where I get where it goes and why it needs to happen the way it does, but it's also like, I'm just really curious what would have happened if Anakin did just kind of give Obi-Wan one whip.
Like, hey, I'm sorry, buddy. Schwabam.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, I'm kind of really curious. Like, I think it would have turned out better if at least Anakin and Ahsoka had kept up the ruse, right?
Mm-hmm.
I by no means can tell you what that would have changed, per se. But what we get instead is we get the ultimate Return of the Jedi reference where...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, Anakin sees Rex. Rex is standing in the crowd. Ahsoka is standing on the platform with the Queen as a slave. R2-D2 rolls in. Obi-Wan is on his knees in front of Anakin. So basically we have Anakin standing in place of Luke on the barge. Han is taken over by Obi-Wan. Ahsoka is standing in place of Leia.
Mm-hmm.
Queen in place of Jabba. R2 is exactly where he's supposed to be. And then Rex takes the place of Lando.
Yep. And there's
Rex,
no Sarlacc.
No Sarlacc. Just the need to whip Obi-Wan.
We do have some chanting from the crowd that is whip the Jedi, whip the Jedi, whip the Jedi, whip the Jedi.
Yep.
And these are all disembodied voices. We don't see anyone.
We never see anybody. They definitely...
We don't even see the hut again, man. Gorgia
I like
would
the
have been...
monocle, man. I like the monocle on that hut. Like, I really wish we got more of the monocled hut. I'm not gonna lie.
I think we do see him again in the future, so...
Oh, thank God.
We won't be let down there.
But, so, yep, we get Rex nodding to Anakin. Anakin gives a two-fingered salute up towards the stage platform area.
And
then
Chekhov's R2 fires.
Yep. Two lightsabers pop out of R2's top dome. And then some mayhem ensues. There's a decent little fight scene. It does not last nearly long enough, in my opinion, honestly, because there's a really cool moment where Anakin, with a lightsaber, is still holding on to a whip.
Mm-hmm. And
is just whipping the shit out of some of these guards that run in. The guards, interestingly enough, mostly have whips of their own.
Mm-hmm.
So a very interesting thing also happens where Ahsoka also gets her own lightsaber returned to her, and she is pretty quickly subdued because she's still wearing like the slave collar, and I don't know why that's not the first thing she took off.
Yeah.
So she immediately gets electrocuted, becomes unconscious, goes down.
Drops
Obi-Wan,
her lightsaber.
Drops her lightsaber. Obi-Wan is then whipped into submission as well. He becomes unconscious.
It does take like 6 dudes to subdue each of the Jedi, and it's only because of electricity that they're able to do it.
I am glad, though, for the first time we kind of avoid the cliche of it happens for a second where everybody kind of takes their turn fighting Anakin, and then at some point like 3 of them kind of just whip at the same time, and that's how they stop Anakin. That's like one of the biggest cliches in any like hand-to-hand combat action film, where everybody waits their turn to fight the good guy. All the bad guys wait their turn.
I would say it's believable in the fact that they were overpowered. I don't know that overpowered is the correct word, but
the Jedi being overpowered, or
yes.
Okay, yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm just glad. I'm glad that the group of guards, knowing they were outpowered by the Jedi, were, instead of like one by one trying to fight these guys, just like, oh no, like everybody go in at once.
Right.
Like we have no honor here. Just our main job is to subdue these motherfuckers. So take them down.
Yo, Cat Cletus, you wasn't supposed to go in by yourself. Everybody was supposed to go in together.
Right. So, and then Rex also is subdued. Otherwise, more guards get on him as well. So everybody is subdued. Everybody is taken down. The Queen then takes Anakin into her bedroom, I believe, is where he's at. Nothing weird about that whatsoever.
He's not even like in like a cage or anything.
Nope. He's just out and about.
He just wakes up in a nook.
Yeah. But the Queen is like, yo, you're going to be my personal slave, and you're going to be my bodyguard.
And here's your lightsaber.
Here's your lightsaber. And as a guarantee that you will do all of these things, just know that the Queen says, your friends' lives are in my hands. So, because Anakin does try and force choke her for a little bit. And the Queen is like, look, I die, your friends die. That's the deal. That's how this goes.
Yep.
So, Anakin, of course, is like, well, yep, sure. I'll hang out with you for a second then. We cut over to Anakin. Or, Ahsoka, right? Is Ahsoka who we see next?
I think the next thing we see is, like, the ship landing, and there's a bunch of Togrutas on it. There's some dude in a floating chair. He's unnamed at this point. Yeah. I think his name is actually Proach. He's Slave Master Proach. He's in like this floating Palpatine chair. It's so weird.
One's Broach. All I have is Keeper Agrus.
Oh, maybe that's who it is.
That's all I have on this guy. He's the warden of wherever the slave center is.
Yes, this reprocessing center. So it's not. It makes it look like it's just another part of the planet. That's the only thing that we can assume at this point.
Right. I agree with you. This part gets really confusing. It does look like a different part of the planet. Based on outside information, it is not. But there's nothing in the episode that reveals that whatsoever.
But he pulls essentially the same maneuver on Obi-Wan that the Queen is doing to Anakin. He's a little less subtle about it, and I don't remember if Obi-Wan like says something or like struggles or whatever, and dude just hits this button, and there are like 6 Togruta that drop through the floors like trapdoors and just drops him out the bottom of this facility, and you watch him fall Wile E. Coyote style down a canyon very, very far, and they probably are no more.
They are dead. They are, yeah.
So we are down to 49,994.
Yeah, it's a very, like, as this show goes, it's a super savage, dark moment.
We have come a long way from the theatrical release of this movie.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm all for this. I am all for this level of darkness in something called Star Wars: The Clone Wars.
Absolutely.
It's putting the war back in the wars of all of this. So yeah, Obi-Wan is going along with it. Then we see Ahsoka.
Mm-hmm.
She's near the palace still. She's locked in a cage, right?
Yep.
She's on a cage, hanging over the side from a very high distance. And Molech is like threatening her for a hot second, right?
Yeah,
and then,
he's like creepy slave mastering it.
It's weird. It's super weird. And then she force pulls him off over the ledge, and he grabs himself. And then he then shocks her because she's still wearing the same collar. Why does she not just kill him outright at this point?
You know, I would say that she's like weak or something, that she just woke up. But when we cut to her, she's meditating.
Yeah.
So
she's meditating,
she must.
And then, like, the moment she, like, pulls him over, like, she's clearly, like,
showing that she's in control of the situation.
Right.
Here's what I'm thinking. Is that killing him won't necessarily free her, and she's playing the patient card right now. She's meditating, trying to look into the Force and see what is to come, and the Force didn't tell her that that's what needed to be done at this time. But she's still gonna, do this whole thing of like, you're being creepy and basically telling me I'm gonna be your sex slave, and I'm not down for that. So
sure,
pushing back, giving a little bit of rebuttal.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just the moment is there. The moment is there, so I just don't understand it.
It's an awkward interchange all around.
Right. I'm glad we get an update on where she is, but yeah, it sets up the relationship in a very odd way. I don't understand it.
Yep.
So
we're back to the Queen and Anakin, right?
Queen and Anakin, they're flying around. They're flying around the planet. They're having a weird conversation, and they land somewhere, and the conversation continues. And the conversation basically comes down to who are slaves in the galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
Who are actually slaves. Like, slaves exist whether you like it or not, sort of thing. And the Queen trying to get Anakin to see her way points out that, like, the Jedi are simply serving the Republic, and by that terminology, even, that Anakin is still a slave to both the Jedi and the Republic.
Yeah, because she calls him out, like, "Hey, you used to be a slave," and he's like, "Why would you think that?" And she says something about, like, the selfless determination in your eyes or whatever.
Yeah.
And they are having this conversation on the back of one of these winged lizard beasts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
they're still flying around, and then it ends with, once they've landed, she makes a deal with him and says, "Look, if you offer to join me and be my bodyguard of your own free will, of your own agency, then I will fully free your friends." That's a big deal, I say.
2 questions.
Yes.
Do his friends include the 49,994 remaining Togruta?
I do not believe so. I believe they are the immediate friends he showed up with. So that's gonna be Ahsoka, Rex,
and Obi.
Yep.
Do you think that whatever he warble whispered to her has anything to do with her infatuation with him?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
I was going to say he must have some smooth pickup lines.
Yeah, whatever he mentions, I don't think so. But yeah, so that closes out the episode. Anakin is left there thinking about the proposal. Again, it's the chance to free his friends fairly simply at the cost of his own freedom, depending on how one views freedom anyways, right?
Yeah, and she basically, the episode essentially ends with her telling him, hey, the choice is yours, so...
Goes full Olmec on him. The choices are yours and yours alone.
Yep. That's the end of this one. Cue loud music.
Yep.
Iris in.
Yeah.
This one's done for.
Yeah, man.
Where did they go on these winged beasts?
These winged beasts, by the way, as I just looked up, they are the Brazaks, Brezaks, also known as Zygerrian gliding lizards.
Nice.
And you got these big old wing flaps underneath. So, I have no idea. But they seem, their homeworld is this planet of Zygerria. Average height 9.3 meters, average length 10.2 meters. Distinction, gliding skin flaps. Classified as lizards. Yeah.
That height and length confuse me.
Yep, I got nothing to help you with that. That's just all it says. That's all it says.
Well, thank you for that information.
Yeah, they appear in this and one other property, but it's just this really.
Okay.
So
anyway, back to my question: where did they go?
These things.
Well, no. Where did Anakin and the Queen go? They're traveling.
I have no idea.
Because my assumption is that they were going to this reassignment facility, reorganization facility, whatever they call it.
It's her lake house or something that they went to. I don't know.
So they're going to romantic, sexy place.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Something like that. Like they're just.
Anakin should feel like all awkward and weird because he's doing the exact same thing that Padme did with Trader what's his name, where she had like the painted on dress and she was like trying to get info out of.
Right. Yeah.
And
oh god, that weird arc, that really awfully weird arc. Yeah.
But Anakin is like doing that now, so either he saw how successful Padme was and was like, well, I'll just like repeat what she did. Or there's some really awkward weirdness going on in this episode. Just going to leave it at that.
Right. Yeah, it's weird. It's all weird. I got nothing for you there. But, yeah.
You want to give this one final judgment?
Yeah, let's go for it. What do you think?
I give this one a thumbs up, man. I enjoyed it.
All right, man. Yeah.
It's a good second part. I like this one better than Kidnapped. This show is evolving in many ways in animation. I think the storytelling is more fluid now that we're not jumping all over the place. Sometimes I think that works well. We'll get to that. But yeah, overall, this one I enjoyed. You know how it goes. The Jedi plans of the Clone Wars are not always logical, shall we say?
Yeah.
Or well thought out. You know, it's kind of spur of the moment. You do this, I'll do that, and go. So it's a little bit of a stretch, you know, getting Anakin to the Queen. Once they get there, and once Obi-Wan's captured, I think this rolls along nicely, and things happen as they should, and it ends at a good point to get you wanting to come back next week.
Yeah. I'm actually with you all the way, man. Dig this episode. Thumbs up for me as well. I also like it better than last week's episode. It flows really well. I agree with you all the way. The characters are well defined for the new ones, like the Queen. Despite never quite being named, or if she was, I completely missed it.
She's named in the
she's
credits.
Interesting as well. Yeah, she's interesting as well. She's memorable to some degree. I'm not gonna lie. Again, this is like that other outside Lithmis that I've applied to some of these episodes. I have no memory of this arc from the first time I ever saw this. Don't remember any of these Zygerrians whatsoever. Don't remember these slaves at all. I know I've seen this episode once. I know I've binged the whole way through. Have no memory of this, but as of now, the Queen was well defined, and I kind of, despite being a bad guy, kind of dug her positioning and her unique demeanor.
Yeah.
I just
gotcha.
After last week's episode where I complimented the upped animation, and especially with like Obi-Wan questioning if Obi-Wan got a new face, right? Was that last week?
It was.
I do find it interesting.
Yeah,
a couple
it was
weeks
last
ago.
Week.
Yeah,
yep, last week.
But
you're correct, because we hadn't seen him for a while on.
On the show at all. Yeah. I find it interesting that they then also attempted these characters that may or may not have fur, but because of like the simple rendering, they're just kind of drawing the texture onto like a flat, like single polygon sort of thing instead of drawing individual hairs. Like
that was my complaint with last week and the mapping of the texture of the ground floor. Absolutely.
So your complaint there, I apply to all the Zygerrians.
Hey, fair enough.
The more we see of them, especially like it doesn't stand out nearly as bad on the Queen as it does on both Darts from last week and who's the other fella? Molech. Yeah. It stands out real bad on Molech, where like again the animation is fine, the facial expressions, those are all well done. It's just the fact that we have like these furry creatures where it's like the fur is just like a single matte drawing on their face, and it's supposed to like be fur, right? It's slightly different than even like the single like brick of hair that like Anakin and Obi-Wan get, like, but at least like that texture kind of sells that, but for some reason the fur on their face just doesn't quite sell it the same way,
It does not.
So yeah, that's the only oddity that I have, but like that's not a major complaint. It's just I just find that interesting because otherwise the acting from everybody, the animation is real cool. We got these cool new lizards that are complex. Hut with a monocle. I really like that hut with a monocle.
Gorgeous.
But yeah, I agree with you. This was a fun episode.
Yeah.
With one awesome dark moment. Like I really like that little dark moment.
Well, there's like the two. Show. There's like the suicide and then the 6 times murder. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the complete disregard for the lives of these slaves. Both of them were pretty cool flashes of darkness, especially after the Imbarn arc. Like, where like last week definitely was much lighter than the Imbarn arc, but like there are still appropriate bits of darkness in an overall lighter story, and I'm down for that as well.
I find it interesting that we're on part 2 of being kidnapped and enslaved, and you're calling this a lighter story.
Definitely lighter in tone. Like there are like these weird flashes of like comedic breaks and stuff like that. We get R2 bumping in, popping out lightsabers. Ahsoka and Anakin have this like fun banter, like, oh, why am I a slave?
Yeah, like, shouldn't you play the slave because you used to be one? Burn.
Yeah, burn. Oh, your mom is dead. Like, like burn. You're an unloved orphan. Yeah, much lighter. much lighter compared to the Umbaran arc, for sure. But yeah, relatively speaking, the show isn't like, because like the Umbaran arc was both like it barely stopped for any sort of comedic break, and it also like was aesthetically dark. Like it was aesthetically hard to see shit, purposefully so.
Yep.
And in service to the story.
Yep.
So now we return to like the bantering Jedi and Obi-Wan and Anakin even like throws in like well, I guess it's up to me to save you again.
And he calls Obi-Wan an old man, which I thought was hilarious.
So yeah, it's definitely the lighter side of the Clone Wars.
How old would Obi-Wan be at this point?
Like 30 something?
Maybe.
Upper 30s?
He was like 25 in episode 1.
Uh-huh. So like 35.
So this is like 12 years after that, probably.
Yeah.
So
upper 30s-ish? Yeah.
He's like my age.
Yeah, your age now. Yeah. So, yeah. It's all right, man. It's all right. Any other notes you got about this episode before we close out?
That's all I got for this one. I'm enjoying this.
Cool.
Next week we have an escape from Kadavo. I don't know where that is because we're on Zygerria, so I guess we'll find out.
Who knows?
But before we can get there, I think we need to throw a couple shouts outs, however that works. As usual, Kevin at They Call Me K-Dub on Twitter took care of our graphic art. Lindsay over at strangefantasymusic@gmail.com was kind enough to put together our opening closing music, and my buddy Blue the Beard on Twitter is the one that built our website, which is notthenerds.com. You can head over there. You can send your friends over there to find a feed of our YouTube videos. Down at the bottom, you got all of our links to social media, so you can reach out to us in whichever way you would prefer. Yeah. Next week, like I said, Escape from Kadavo, and unless you have anything else, we'll say goodbye for this week.
Nope, that is all. I've been Lorenzo.
I've been Kevin.
These aren't the nerds you're looking for.
Bye-bye.